And thank you all for coming, because you didn't need to come here. You know, you need to go to the main sessions, but you don't need to come to these ones or pick this one. So I'm grateful that you have come to this one. It's great to see lots of faces that were here the last year and the year before, and I hope that we take forward the discussion about the steel sector as we do each year, and this year is no exception to what we're going to discuss. So welcome to this session. It's the steel one, just in case you think it's something else. And the title of this session actually is Strategic Growth for the UK Steel Sector, but to me we could have called it a business plan for steel. I'm Gareth Stace, I'm Director General of UK Steel, and UK Steel represents the steel sector in the UK, steel producers and a number of downstream companies as well. The panel, we won't have a long thing about the panel introduce themselves. If I miss out something when the panel speak, they can introduce themselves a bit more. But we have John Bolton, an old friend he's not old himself, but I've known John for a great many years, who was the chair of UK Steel for a number of years, but is now, and I'm really grateful that he is, the chair or the co-chair with the business secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, of the Steel Council, which will deliver a steel strategy. Then we have Jonathan Brash, the MP for Hartlepool, a steel MP. This is fantastic, and he also is, and I'm really pleased to say, the chair of the APPG for steel in Parliament. So he's our champion for steel within Parliament just across the road. We have Ros Bullard, who is from Green Alliance, who, Ros, say your job title, which is Research and Policy Director. And Ros knows the steel industry very well because she used to work for UK Steel. So we really do have a steel panel here, which rounds it off with somebody who I've also known for a very long time and I have enormous respect for, is Roy Ricker, CBE, the General Secretary of Trade Union Community. So that's our panel. All I'm going to do today is introduce it, then John's going to talk more about the actual steel strategy and his vision for it as co-chair, and then we'll have a few questions that I'll ask the panel, but really we should come straight to you as quickly as we can, the audience, for you to ask your questions. And really, we're going to cover a lot of steel topics, but really all centred around the steel strategy. Because why is it so important? To me, it's the only game in town. We're a sector that's suffering. I'll talk about why we're suffering and really what can get us out of that. I don't think but just hoping for the best. So I think the steel strategy is our best chance for our sector of turning our fortunes around and having a much brighter future, which we'll talk about more. But to me, it's a game of two halves. Why? Well, let me do the negative first. The negative is we literally only supply 32% of the UK steel demand at the moment as the steel sector. That was 50% 2 years ago. So imports are rising. Global demand for steel is dropping. Steel prices globally are low, but there is massive excess steel capacity around the world, and that hurts us in terms of those rising exports into the UK. We have in the UK an uncompetitive business environment, notably energy costs are uncompetitive for our sector. And many manufacturers talk about that a lot as it's something that hurts them, but in the steel industry, given we're so electro-intensive, it hurts us more than anyone else. So when we pay 50% more than our competitors in Germany and France, that really means something. So to me, 2025, and to others, and not all of us in this room, some steel sectors are investing very, very heavily. It's not all doom and gloom. But for me, 2025 actually could be as bad as the steel crisis in 2015, 2016. And we need to recognise that to kind of understand the problems and understand how we can get out of that. And so the positives are that we have a government that literally gets the steel sector, understands the steel sector. We have a government that's publishing a steel strategy that will look at future demand for steel and understand where those opportunities lie. And where do they lie? Well, they lie in offshore wind. We know that 25 million tonnes and more is needed in offshore wind of steel, is needed in offshore wind between now and 2050. We know the electricity grid needs a lot of upgrading. That's a lot of steel there. Only in a couple of weeks ago, we went to Scunthorpe Steelworks, hosted by British Steel, where the CEO of Heathrow announced that yes, they are going to build the third runway, and yes, there's going to be loads of investment, and for us, crucially, they are going to use steel made in the UK. They made that commitment on that day. Then in defence, To me, if we summed up Rachel Reeves' speech, it was defence, defence, defence. And so then the defence sector is very important for the steel industry. And also there's a real positive is we sit on an abundance of the raw material that we're going to need 100% of in the future, that is scrap steel. There is no other country in the world that has as much steel that we generate per year, 11 million tonnes, and if you divide that by the amount of steel we produce, that number comes out the biggest in the world. There is no other country in the world that has an abundance of steel like we do, scrap steel that we do. So we can have a bright future, but only if government, industry, trade unions work together and if they want it and want to take the bold action that's needed. So today, the discussion in this room is, am I talking pie in the sky or am I talking reality? And John Bolton's going to tell us which one it is.
Thank you. Thanks, Gareth. Well, she didn't all mention defence. Thanks to Katie, we got a mention of steel, so I appreciate the question. That was much appreciated. So this is my second go at being a co-chair of the Steel Council. The first time was in the 2015-16. And the goal of the reason the Steel Councils were put together at that point was reactive. There was problems, we had to put it together, we had issues right across the sector. So faced with that challenge, Steel Council was put together. This time though, it's different. So as Gareth has just said, we've got a government that's very supportive of the steel sector. It's been backed by £2.5 billion worth of investment on top of the £500 million that Tata have had committed to them for their investment in South Wales. So it is a real opportunity. I see this as a positive step. Now, you could argue it's late. It's probably later than we would have liked because a lot of the decisions have been taken around the steel sector, but it's not too late, I think, to make a difference. So as part of that, developing that steel strategy, Steel Council has been put together. And if you look at the membership of the Steel Council, then it includes the devolved governments, obviously joint chaired by Johnny Reynolds, and Minister Jones is also the industry minister, is part of the group. We've got the businesses, the business heads from the UK of the main steel manufacturing businesses involved, the trade unions, trade associations, and from other parties as well. So it comes across a broad group, and I did note the questions this morning about making sure that we are consulting as much as possible with industry as we can, and I'll come on to that later on. So a bit about the strategy. You know, Gareth has already said that he sees this, and I totally agree with him, as being a business plan. What we're looking to do is create a plan for investment in the UK steel industry. So in the past, when we've had steel councils put in place, it's been to react to maybe a company issue or to a specific regional issue. And this is really about putting a business plan in place for the UK. So it's what are the elements of a basic business plan? We need to know what the demand is. So the demand for steel, not just for steel in this case, though green steel as well, because that is a major driver for the investment in the UK or in the steel sector globally at the moment. And then it's about mapping that demand against our current capabilities and capacities. Where are the gaps? What can we do with the current set of assets that we have? And I do make the point, this is company agnostic. This is just looking at the assets that we have and how can those assets be used to supply the demand that we need in the UK to support the critical demand in the UK, particularly for infrastructure. So we'll identify the gaps and then identify what is needed to actually plug those gaps, whether it be utilising the assets that we already have here in the UK or actually looks for investment in new assets in the UK. So again, as already said, it's a business plan and a business plan that we hope we can use to attract investment. And if I look at the next slide, then this is not an exhaustive list, but these are the sort of components of that steel strategy. So first of all, as I've said, it's demand. It's not just demand for steel, but also for green steel. Is there really a green steel premium available, and what is that premium? How long will it last, and does it justify investment? What can we do in the short term to our cost base? So obviously energy cost is there, electricity prices has been there all through my career. And it's something that needs to be addressed clearly. Scrap the supply chain. How much can we keep the scrap that we need for the new developments in the UK? And steps are already being taken in Europe, particularly, to sort of manage that situation. Iron units. Do we need more than scrap? Do we need to put virgin iron units into the UK in some form or other to make the product qualities that we might need? And that's a question that we're asking the MPI, Material Processing Institute, we've been asked to do a piece of work looking at what that technology might look like and and the size of that investment might look like. Do we actually need those units here in the UK? What skills do we need? I'm particularly worried about skills at the moment. The image of the industry always been a challenge. It's a particular challenge at the moment as I've been going around the various sites. I've been talking to the trade union representatives as well as the management, and maintaining those skills and that knowledge base is critical at the moment because we're at risk of losing it. And then there's the trade elements as well that we see on the slide here. What can we do? And we see trade is a major issue at the moment. What can we do in light of the potential additional trade tariffs placed on steel from the UK? And what can we do in terms of carbon border adjustment mechanism as well? How can we actually protect the UK industry that's going to invest heavily in decarbonisation? How can we protect that investment? So there's an awful lot to take into account of at the moment. So consultation and this kind of debate is really, really important. If I look at the next slide. And we've already started. Obviously, there's the Steel Council meeting on the 7th of January. We're planning 2 more in spring, early spring and late spring. There's been 1 ministerial roundtable up at Forge Masters already, which looked at the future demand for steel, that first question of that business plan. And then we're planning some more ministerial roundtables on key topics associated with the supply chain, technology, expanding the market, and of course trade. And in parallel with this, we're getting round, I've certainly been around most of the manufacturing sites in the UK now and talked to the major stakeholders and talked to trade unions to get as much input as we possibly can. You're probably aware that a consultation document was launched a couple of weeks ago, and I would urge everybody to contribute to that and respond to that, and that it's open for responses till the 30th of March. So I'll stop there to allow for more questions, but hopefully that sets the scene.
Brilliant, thanks, John. And so, thank you. So for the panel, but I'll come to Roy first. Can the steel strategy turn around the fortunes of steel in the UK? Do you think that the government is willing to do the heavy lifting that is needed to do this, in addition to fixing the short-term challenges such as energy and carbon costs?
Not a bad start, is it? I wish I'd got the email that said we didn't have to turn up, John. I didn't get that one. That's not an easy answer, Gareth, and the answer is probably in some part yes, but in some part I am worried, because I think we do have a government who's prepared to support the industry. We've seen that with the announcements of the 2.5 billion, etc., etc. But we have to create the environment where people want to invest and want to invest in the UK. And the statistic that frightens the life out of me, which makes me worried, and are we going to be able to succeed in this, is the 32%. Because that's telling you there's a lot of people out there that are not buying steel from the UK. And I think the question this morning to HR was cheering you on, because, you know, talking about not being forgotten, not being left behind, our foundation industries is absolutely the right question they should be answering. So it's not just about creating the environment for people to want to buy from the UK. It's having a commitment to achieve that, to find out what we need to do, what we need to change, because clearly we've got to change something, because it's not working, is it, if we're down to 32%. And I think we need to go out and talk to people. We need to go out and talk, you know, we talk to ourselves a lot, and we talk to, you know, the steel producers a lot. And the Steel Council is probably missing a vital component, and that is somebody who's not a steel producer and somebody who's actually a steel buyer and somebody who uses steel to say, well, what do we need to do? What do we need to change? Is it that we need to differentiate more on quality, on service, on the things that we can control to make people want to buy UK steel? So maybe that's something the Steel Council needs to start looking at more widely, not just, you know, the things that you would expect us to look at. Yes, of course, energy costs. We're fighting hard, lobbying hard with government. And I do sit on the Industrial Strategy Council, and the first meeting I went to, they stuck up a slide and it said energy costs crippling, steel industry crippling, and you go, well, we know that. We've been telling you about it for how many years have we been lobbying on energy costs? Do I think there's a will to do something about it? Yes, I do. What that is, I don't know, and I don't think they do. And that's the bit that worries me. I don't think there's a clear view yet in government what to do about energy costs. And I'm not seeing anything that's giving me hope that we are going to crack that. And if we don't crack that, then I think we're going to continue to decline.
So, Jonathan, you're the closest person on this panel to those ministers that Roy's talking about. And do you think that that commitment from ministers is there beyond DBT? We know it's there in DBT, but do you think it's there in Treasury, DESNES and Cabinet Office? And do you think that commitment, the collective government, working together, mission-led government, is there to deliver something for the steel sector? Because it does require, as Roy was talking about, that really heavy lifting, that real change of focus. And as Roy says, they know exactly, the government, not they, in positive way, fortunately, the government knows exactly why energy costs are more here than elsewhere, and we've given them the solution to change that. So all they need to do is change that.
Exactly. Look, I mean, first thing to say is I'm not here to cheerlead the government. I think my role as a backbench member of Parliament and chair of the APPG is to hold the government to account when I think they're not getting it right. Look, I mean, I agree with what's been said so far. I think the will is there. But you make this point about across government, and I do think that's absolutely hit the nail on the head. Look, the reason we don't have a competitive market for steel in this country is because there's absolutely no incentive to have one. There is a reason why steel is being imported from abroad. It's because it's cheaper. Mm-hmm. And I'm afraid there is in certain parts of government, and when I say government, I don't mean ministers, I mean the institutions of government, that doesn't really understand why you would ever pay more for British steel if you could get a cheaper alternative from abroad. And it will never understand that. It's the same rationale that says, why would I train a brickie from Hartlepool and when I could get a cheaper import from abroad? It's as simple as that. It's the cost of everything and the value of nothing. So one of the things that I think has to happen is that we have to force that incentive for a competitive market in this country. And that comes down, quite frankly, to dealing with the trade situation that we have, dealing with tariffs, and dealing with what's coming on our horizon next year, 2026, when our trade protections disappear, when the European Union introduces its own CBAM, and we're waiting another year to do that here in this country. I think we have to say quickly and effectively, we are not going to come up with a targeted, nuanced trade defence in the next 12 months. We can come up with a targeted, nuanced trade defence, but it isn't going to happen in 12 months. So we have two choices. Do we try to do that? Or do we say, do you know what? Let us put the blanket tariffs on now and work out how we make them more nuanced and targeted later. Because if you do the latter, what you will end up with is an incentive to make the market in this country more competitive. If you block the cheap imports, if you prevent essentially what is the dumping of steel into our economy from other parts of the world, then you force that conversation. And I agree actually with Roy about, I haven't heard the solution to energy prices yet, but I think everybody's got to be on that mission. And I don't think everybody is at the moment on that mission because the private sector doesn't need to be. In so many different ways they can source from other places, and that doesn't really affect them in that case. So the next 12 months for me is about recognizing that globalized model of trade, the thing that we've had for the last 30 years, but which the rest of the world is abandoning it fast, is something we have to grapple with very, very quickly as a country. Because if we don't, and I think I said this at the Steel Summit back in December, we won't have a steel industry. It'll be gone. And it's time to decide. And we can't do it through half measures. I said back in December there were three elements to what we have to do. We have to procure, we have to invest, and we have to protect. I think we're seeing really positive signs on procurement. He talks about Heathrow. I think we've seen the national procurement policy. I think there is a real drive to put social value at the heart of everything we've done. We've heard the announcements on defence this week and the absolute focus on making that about British industry and British jobs. I think we've seen the investment, and John chairs the council with £2.5 billion ready to go. My concern is the protection. That's where my concern is. We have to protect the British steel industry in order for the procurement and the investment to work.
Wow, that opening statement showed that you really are the champion of the steel sector, Jonathan. That was quite an opening statement in terms of what you were calling for there. And I'm sure many in the room will seek the questions on that. I come to Ros, and then I'm going to ask questions from the audience. And so get those questions ready. And Ros, I'm going to ask you more, in general, what do you think of the steel strategy and what do you think it can deliver? But, I remember you were at our launch event in 2022, summer 2022, of our net zero roadmap for the steel sector. We were the first country in the world to come up with a net zero roadmap for the steel sector. We're told that be a first mover and you'll gain an advantage. And I wonder if we have gained an advantage because we, will be that first country in the world in terms of producing green steel. There's a long way to go. So do you think the steel strategy can do that for us?
That's a lot of questions wrapped up in one, isn't it? I mean, just my overall impression of what I've seen so far is that there are lots of good elements in there. It's encouraging to see such breadth, and recognising and reflecting, I think, so much of what people have been saying, including kind of green groups over the years. So that it's really encouraging what's there so far. It does look quite hard, quite a lot of that, and I do question kind of will the delivery will be there? Will this time be different? We've been talking about lots of these problems for some time, so. Yeah, I also have some concerns about kind of can it be done in the time available, and will that then be followed up by commitments through kind of the measures and the years that need to follow afterwards? Will we be able to really address that issue of sometimes things are going to cost more, are people willing to pay? But yeah, good start, I think. On the kind of opportunity of being a green leader, I mean, the world has changed somewhat. I think it is a little bit harder to say the whole world. So 6 months ago, I would have sat here and said, but look, the EU's considering carbon border adjustments. Companies around the world are setting out new targets or are trying to now enact their targets, and we've got the EU CBAM. Some of that has fallen away a little bit, but I mean, through my career, I'm old enough at least to have seen climate kind of come up and down, and climate change is not going to go away. We're seeing more and more impacts of climate change around us. I am confident that we will get back to the point that those companies and also the US will get back to a point that they really recognise they have to do something about climate. And I really think from that point of view that as we're building things, it makes absolute sense to be future-proofing, to be building for kind of the new generation of plant with kind of 20, 30 years into the future in mind. And also that there are those, as has been explained as well, there is that security aspect too, to actually relying on the scrap that we have here. It makes absolutely no sense. That is a domestic resource. The ore that we import and the coal that we import, we have to import those. We're sitting on that scrap. So making first use of that makes so much sense for a range of reasons. So I'm still confident. I think we've also got the potential to demonstrate how you can really electrify an economy and be a first leader on that. Some of it will have ups and downs, and I don't want to suggest that it's kind of all going to be immediately rosy, but I think it's really encouraging to see kind of the plan for steel consultation talking about the opportunities here, and I would really urge people not to kind of lose sight of that longer term issue and the fact that climate change is really not going anywhere.
Great, thank you. So do we have any questions? We don't have a microphone, as I think, so it's a small room.
Do you have a microphone?
Oh, we don't need a microphone, though, but let's
We've got a microphone.
So, we certainly have two. I was hoping we can take 3 questions. Could you say, so there are 3. Could you say who you are and where you're from? And then we'll have the 3 questions, and then the panel can just pick them up if they want. So, please.
It's really encouraging to hear, obviously, about the commitment with Heathrow and that they're going to be using UK steel in the works for that runway. I was an early member of kind of the UK Steel Charter. Were you on that, Ross? Was that something you were involved with?
I think.
So,
It probably started when you were there, yeah.
There's been a few trusts.
And Heathrow signed it 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So it's still going.
Sorry. Thank you. Yeah, so the UK Steel Charter, which was something that we've been part of for many, many years, we make sure that we source British steel into our products that go into the steel industry. I think, well, as an idea, to supercharge that, I think now is the time to sort of really kickstart that movement again and try and get more companies onto that. And one of the things that, obviously, we've got this massive investment going back into the steel industry, a number of plants being built. There's the expansion of Forge Masters, for example, that's going on at the moment. Huge, huge project. Why are we not specifying British steel in those projects?
Yeah.
I had a conversation the other day and I just got blank faces and I'm like, surely it's British Steel going into this. This is MOD. And the answer I got was, well, it's too expensive. I'm like, no, this is crazy. We've got to start at the root of our industry at the beginning. Yes. And if we can't even build the plant with the product, we forget everything else. It's how we get them. That money that's being spent needs to be all spent on that product. Although it was encouraging to hear for everybody else's benefit that they are looking at it's British, European or American products that are going into things, and specifically not Chinese products, which is very encouraging to hear.
Well, you've asked the question. I just need to move on.
Yes, no, it was just that, how can we supercharge that really and really try and get people on board, and how do we start at the root?
Great, thank you. And thank you for your support of the UK Steel Charter. And if anyone in the room is thinking, yes, I'll sign up to UK Steel Charter, then speak to John Harrison here or Louise Young, who can help you understand and tell you why it's so beneficial for your company to sign up to UK Steel Charter, like the CEO of Heathrow did 2 weeks ago at Scunthorpe Steelworks. Kamal.
Thanks, Gareth. Kamal Rajput from Tata Steel. It was just to actually echo that original point with regards to, as a sector, we've made some, and this is a question for Jonathan actually, we've made some recommendations through procurement reform, and I think policy reform is pivotal to attract investment. And my question is, how ambitious can we be, or can government be, with regards to, and I use the word quite specifically, mandating a percentage of material in public sector projects? Because I was involved in developing the charter. The charter is really important, but effectively it's a hearts and minds campaign. It's not reform. And I think given everything we've discussed this morning around defence specifically, I think we should absolutely be ambitious and mandate at least percentages for UK steel material to be in projects.
Bold statement. And just pass your microphone to
Jamie McLeod from Crow UK. I noticed there were several references to CBAM, which is great. Obviously, steel is a hugely impacted sector in various ways. Producers, downstream users by EU CBAM already to some extent. That's going to be supercharged next year, and then ultimately by UK CBAM. Would the panel support, from a trade perspective, trying to link UK and EU CBAMs, and does the panel see that as likely to happen politically? I know the government has expressed a desire for it, but yeah, very interested on the views on potentially linking UK and EU CBAMs.
Brilliant, thank you. Great, 3 questions. The panel can answer them as in the order they want to answer. We've only got 15 minutes because the Chancellor went over time, unfortunately, and so we have to finish by 5 to 4. But I'd love to get the answers from the panel and then 3 more questions if I can before we have to finish. So you're looking at me, Ros. Do you want to start?
I feel like others are better kind of positioned to talk about procurement. But shall I talk about the CBAM? Because, yeah, absolutely, I think it would be really valuable. In fact, we'd rather see the UK and EU ETS linked as well. A bigger market, better kind of price discovery. I think that would be the long-term goal, and then the kind of CBAM linking could definitely be part of that. I think we've seen really encouraging signs that certainly from the UK side, that it's much higher up the agenda. And I would hope that there's a conversation that we had on the EU side. I think from colleagues that have had conversations in the EU, I think there's still quite a bit to do, and it will need to be part of a kind of wider package of measures and discussions. But I'm feeling much more optimistic than I was, and I think that it would be a really positive step, personally.
Right, thank you. Who wants to go next?
Can I just come in on a couple of things. The procurement, absolutely. We should just be throwing caution to the wind now and doing it. It can be done. It's fairly no cost, and it's a win-win. And we should be looking at some of the social clauses within contracts. That are you supporting British jobs? Are you supporting UK training, apprenticeships, and all of the social clauses that you would expect to see? And that could be done. I think one of the questions I always ask, and I've said if you've heard me speak before, I'm going to say it. We are not making the steel. We don't make certain grades of steel. We are forcing people to buy from elsewhere because we're not making that steel. And for so long, it's been such a short-sighted approach from the industry to always retract. And do you know what they call it? Chopping the tail. And I've heard it recently, last week. I'm not going to name names. Oh, we need to chop the tail. We can't afford to make that anymore. That's commodity stuff, so we'll just get rid of that. You are inviting competition and competitors into your marketplace, and it's no great surprise that we're down to 32%. So if we don't make the steel, don't matter if you've got the best procurement rules in the world, they can't buy it. On the UK Steel Charter, absolutely, we should be out there now trying to encourage everybody to sign up to the charter. But we've got to give, I've got to come back to what I said earlier, we've got to give them a reason why. When I started out in this industry, it was about the UK had advantages, whether that was delivery and lead times, whether that was service, whether that was follow-up service, research, development. You worked with your customer, you guided your customer through a process, and therefore they were more likely, even if they had to pay a bit more or a premium, but they would buy from the UK because they got that quality of service. And that's what we need to talk to the customers and find out what they need and what they want to get that back, to get that 32% up. But the UK Steel Charter, as Gareth says, has been there many years, and I've been around when it was first signed. We went down to Heathrow and we stood there with a big banner, and Heathrow signed up to it in 2019. Nice relaunch, enjoyed it in Scunthorpe, but I dare say give it a few more years and we'll relaunch it again somewhere else. If you're not going to live up to it, don't bother signing it, is my opinion. And it was ironic to me, and I'll finish on this point. You might think I'm being a bit negative today, and I am, because I'm in a bit of a negative mood because of the way things are developing. We sat at Heathrow, the launch, in Scunthorpe, the home of construction steel. And I'm going to say it again, and people need to wake up, smell the coffee. That plant is on a knife edge. And we must not allow British steel to fail. That will be a derelict of duty for any government, and it will be a shame on all of us if that plant fails.
Okay, and before I go to Jonathan, I'll come to somebody who used to run that plant, but you're going to respond to something that Roy's just mentioned, and I'll come to you, Jonathan.
Back in the days when Roy used to be happy all the time. I'm going to support that. I think what has been said about the procurement strategy is right. We've been talking about it for so many years, don't we? They've come back to these things. And what happens on the continent is that they take into account in awarding public contracts, things like social value. We could add to that now environmental value as well. So a whole host of things need to be taken into account when awarding contracts, not just the price at the end of the day, particularly when it's publicly funded money. A comment on what Roy just said about products. Yes, we don't make some of the products here in the UK, and there's a lot said about plate recently. We'd have 2 plate mills operating in the UK, but they can't make the full range, particularly when you look at the offshore, and there's an opportunity there. Hopefully the strategy will come out of the strategy, and it's something that will provoke some investment of some form or other. But there's a lot of products we do make that we're still not making because we're importing them because we're not competitive enough. So some of the issues that were raised about, we've got to buy ourselves some time for this strategy to take effect. So the things we're talking about in terms of procurement, in trade, we need to put those things in place. And we do need to make sure that the capacity and the capability we have at the moment, and I echo Roy's comments about Scunthorpe, we put in place those strategies and those actions that protect that industry that we already have.
Yeah. Thank you, John. Jonathan, and then we'll get 3 more questions.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be very brief because you could just summarise my answer as what Roy said. Because, Kamal, you asked me the question. Absolutely, we should be mandating on procurement. Of course we should. There's no question about that. We have a huge economic lever at our disposal, and we should absolutely be using it. But, you know, I've got a background in local government, and we talk about community wealth growth in local government. And one of the principles of that is looking at what your local community can provide and then identifying the gaps, and not go, oh, there's the gap, we'll go somewhere else to get that. Working out how to fill the gap locally. We've got to think about how we fill the gaps in Britain when it comes to our steel industry. I'm very proud of the fact that HMS Ventura is going to be twinned with Hartlepool. It's been built in Rosyth at the moment. It hasn't got an ounce of British steel in it. Not 1 ounce of British steel in it. And that's the MOD, which I think Katie made reference to earlier, is that, you know, it's building a frigate in this country, but it's not building it with British steel. And we have to ask the question why. And until we ask that question, we're not going to get anywhere. But we have to use the economic levers at our disposal when it comes to procurement, no question.
3 more questions then. Have we got 3 more questions here? One over here, one over here. So if the microphone goes to just up in the middle, and then 1 more question. Oh, we've got 4. That's nice. Oh, Gabriella, you should. Perhaps you've got 4 time for 4. Right, your name, where you're from, and really quick questions.
Okay, Emrah Göztürk, I'm the CEO of Sterling Thermal Technology. We are a customer for steel, an SME that is working in power generation, defense, nuclear, renewable, that kind of sectors. And I hear about the blanket tariffs approach for steel, all these kind of discussions. And obviously we are, as a manufacturer, about 80-85% of our products are exported. So when you're talking about putting a blanket tariffs of steel, are you going to be shifting, highly paid engineering and manufacturing jobs that we are putting on the table with, let's say, lower value added in general seen in the industry steel jobs on the table?
Thank you. And then just pass it to the chap over at the right at the end. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Gun from University of Warwick. We are doing some piece of research on UK steel industry. I want to ask about the recycling of steel. So as you mentioned, there is 11 million tons scrapped every year, and most of it is exported. And so what's the barriers that we're not using our own steel? And will that issue be handled in the new strategy? Thank you.
Thank you. And then, sir, you, and then we'll give Gabriella the last question. Actually, you might be talking about scrap, perhaps. I don't know. Let's see. It's Antonio.
So in the nuclear industry, there's a lot of hype around the SMRs, these small modular reactors. The equivalent in the steel industry would be the mini mills, the quantum mini mills. Is that something that is being considered as a solution for specialist steel?
Right. I'm sure John will answer that one. And Gabriella, last question.
Hi, Gabriella, Celsa Steel. I think we can all commend the effort that's going into, working towards this steel strategy. But I think our real concern is time. And, we're going to be consulting on this. The consultation closes end of March. There'll be numerous reviews. Something will come out hopefully in summer. Then there'll be discussions about the recommendations. And a whole year will pass. And so my question is, so what do we do in the interim? Because ultimately, we can do things. It's just a case of the want to do them. And I think that, I think we're getting a little bit lost with the fantastic work, a little bit lost with this whole strategy and forgetting that the time that lapses in between. And we're all in testing waters at the moment. So what are your thoughts on the kind of immediate actions we can take? Because we haven't got the time to wait.
And I talked about immediate actions in terms of energy prices, carbon costs, but also there's the Trump tariffs. So shall I just go this way? Because I think I came that way before. So John, would you like to go first?
Okay, simple one on the scrap, why we're not utilising scrap at the barriers, we don't have the demand for it. Nobody's using it, no electric, apart from Celsa with about 1 million tonnes of scrap demand at the moment. That's it, and there is some scrap going into Scunthorpe because they've got the 2 furnaces operating at the moment, but there isn't really a market at the moment. But it is something we have to address in the future because we have to find a way to keep the scrap here at the moment. In terms of the, I think I'll deal with the short-term issue. I think we're all saying the same to a degree, that we actually acknowledge that the short-term, there are some short-term challenges that we have to address. I am expecting that some of those short-term actions they'll be apparent to most people in the room already, but they will come out of the work that we're going to do. And then, yes, it'll be a case of where there's a will, there's a way to make it happen, because we have to buy ourselves some time, because you're absolutely right. It is going to take time to put the whole structure in place, to attract greater investment, to put new capacity and capability in place. The mini mill question. So there's several kinds of mini mills. I could spend the next half an hour. It's about the same. I mean, Celsa's a mini mill. Celsa's a mini mill, and we have them already of a certain size. There are something called micro mills at the moment. There are 350,000 ton capacity, which again could be something we could look at for local demand of products that are used very, very locally. But yeah, they are part of the solution. Absolutely.
I'm not immune at all to the point about exports, and I think that's why I said that you work up to a nuanced, targeted approach. But the thing not to do is expect to be able to do that and get it right straight away and realise that our steel industry is already dead before you've come up with the tariff regime that actually suits you the best. It's about the way that you do it. I think we have to put the protections in place on a blanket level initially, because that's picking up the point about time. We don't have a lot of it in this regard. But then, of course, we need to think about how we can tweak that as we go forward. The only other thing I would say is we are in a changing world right now. And I think one of the things that's not come up in this debate very much is if we live our lives reliant on actors on whom we really can't rely for our imports in the long term, that's actually a national security issue. And I think we have to recognise that we do not want to be in a situation where all you have to do to cripple this country is stop a particular supply chain, and we now can't do the things that we need to do to protect our country. So there's a whole other element to this as well. We have to reverse that figure, the figure that Roy opened with. We need to be, importing far, 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 far less than we actually domestically produce if we're going to be prepared going forward. Just on scrap, one thing I do want to say about this, and Ros might disagree with me, we can't put all our eggs in that basket. And I think there's a lot of people who talk about electric arc furnaces, scrap, and they're very excited about it, and they're right to be. But that will not produce the range of steel that we need to meet all the demand in this country. And I think we have to be very, very clear about that. We need a diverse range of steel in order to do the job. So scrap, yes, it's a resource that's there. We should absolutely use it. We need to invest in the technology to make sure that we can. But we can't put all our eggs in that basket because it's not the only show in town and it won't do the job by itself.
Thank you. We've got 2 minutes, unfortunately, so 1 minute each.
Sorry. I'll pick up the scrap point. I mean, in theory, if there's demand, you'd expect supply to increase as well. I think when we looked at this before, it seems like there's some things that you could do as well. It's easy to export poorly sorted scrap because there's no kind of restrictions on export quality. So I think putting in place restrictions on export quality, and we know that some of the markets that scrap goes to don't charge VAT on scrap. So that's another thing that you could look at doing to support scrap producers to kind of get up the capacity and capabilities themselves to then supply into the sector at a good price as well. And in terms of just on that point around continuing to produce some iron, I think you could get away with an awful lot less iron. I think the more people look at this, the less and less iron it looks like we need, but I take the point that some would be useful and there are potential security benefits. Maybe there's a security premium to discuss as well as a green premium. I would just say that, for instance, and I know MPI are looking at CCS as one option, that just adds costs all the way through, and you've got massive upstream emissions associated with coal. So I think be careful, and also think about whether strategic partnerships actually, like Germany's taking with Namibia and places like that. So security doesn't always have to mean everything onshore, I'd say. Sometimes it can mean a good combination of different partners, but just as long as those options are being considered.
Unfortunately, Roy, less than 1 minute.
Sorry.
I can do it. I'm happy. I think the steel strategy or the green paper is a step in the right direction. I think the government have a right to bring that. Obviously, encourage everybody to look at it, to put in their submissions, to look at the issues that are relevant to them. Time, absolutely, I think we're up against it, and we know what's happening at the moment. There is talk that this steel strategy is going to be done by the spring. Didn't say which spring, or whether spring in this country actually starts in September. So not sure when, but they have said the spring, so we live in hope. Scrap, I think that's a fantastic question, and I do think something we have not properly looked at. There was some work done, I think it was by Warwick University previously, where the whole issue was scrap, and I think that's something that we absolutely, because there's lots of debate about, it's not just scrap, it's quality, it's whether it's got the right properties and whether, what's going to happen to the price, etc. So big issues. We were talking to Tata about what they were going to do. They're talking about a shredder. That's, 100 million tonne for a shredder that hasn't been put into the plan, so we're not sure what's happening. But the whole issue of scrap, I think, needs to be completely looked at, and I think we do, because John's right. What he said is that at the moment, if everybody now comes on stream, Tata, 3 million tonne arc furnace, rather than talking about, possibly ratcheting up to 2 million tonne, we don't know what's going to happen at Scunthorpe yet, but there's talk of 2 arc furnaces across British Steel. So the demand for scrap is going to, obviously is going to increase. And I'll just finish on the primary steel, because it's obviously a passion for us in the steel industry. And I think We cannot sort of ignore that. And I think they have commissioned, or they've asked MPI, John, to do a study on how we can maintain primary steelmaking, whether that's through something like DRI facilities, etc. But maintaining that ability to make primary steel is important.
Great, thank you. I wish we had 2 hours for this session. It would have been, even 2 hours would have been filled. We've had a great panel. We've had great questions. This is a great session. Thank you very much. Now in the Fleming room in 4 minutes is the next session. And then, of course, there's the drinks reception at 5:30. So hopefully we'll all see you there. Thank you very much for coming, and let's thank the panel. Thank you.